Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. In the middle of the Feast of Tabernacles. Today's message is not going to be a real sermon or message per se. It's going to be more like a study. And it's going to be King Asa or the title will be King Asa, or is it Asa? Somebody correct me, they know. But anyway, it's King Asa and Joshua. It's a parallel using King Asa of Judah as a parallel or a type of Joshua. And we're going to see along the way, he's going to fall short. No, you're right, he's going to be imperfect. But why is this imperfection? Anybody? What is one of the number one rules about types? Types are inherently imperfect. They are inherently imperfect. Why must that be? Anybody?
Replica of the real thing.
It's a replica of the real thing, because if it was perfect match, it wouldn't be a type, would it? It wouldn't be a symbol or a type. Because if Asa had been perfect, well, we would have had no need for Joshua now, would we? Anyway, the parallel, his story, his account is found in a couple different places. One is the Second Chronicles. We're going to find 3 chapters in Second Chronicles, chapters 14, 15, and 16. And there's a parallel account in 1 Kings, but it's a very brief account. Yes, it's a very brief account in 1 Kings 15. This one contains a bit more detail, so we're going to use the one in 2 Chronicles. There may be an occasional reference to 1 Kings. Okay, so here we go. 2 Chronicles 14, verse 1. So Abijah rested with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David. Then Asa, his son, reigned in his place. In his days, the land was quiet for 10 years. So Asa's coming in after, a couple of bad kings. In verse 2, Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of Yahweh his Elohim. For he removed the altars of the foreign Elohim and the high places, and he broke down the sacred pillars, and he cut down all the wooden images. Okay, so let's just talk a moment. What parallel could we make out of this so far? Well, we got Saul coming in after a reign of a couple of bad kings. Now remember, before I go any further, when it's parallel to Joshua, we're going to be going back and forth between what he did in the past during his ministry here on earth and what he will be doing in the future when he returns. So that part of the comparison is going to be a little flip-flop. So you might want to make note of that as well. Forgot to mention that detail. Well, and I seem to recall, I didn't write this down in my notes, but I seem to recall a couple of places in the gospel, as for verse 2, that Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of Joshua, in the eyes of Yahweh, his Elohim. Tell me, was Joshua perfect in all his ways? Yes. He spoke only the words his father gave him, right? We find it in a couple places in John 8 and a couple other places as well. He did not sin. He failed to sin, correct? Lived a sinless life, that's right. Did King Asa do that? Not exactly. He did pretty good, but not quite up to Joshua. And he removed the foreign altars, verse 3, of all the high places, and he broke down the sacred pillars. He cut down the wooden images. Okay, so far, he's off to a good start. Tell me, did Joshua cut down the sacred images and the wooden pillars during his time on earth. Not recorded, but what's going to happen to him when he returns? Anybody? Let's try Micah 5:3. Or your place in 2nd Chronicles. Let's try Micah 5:3. Let me find something else with a marker here. Chronicles. Now, Micah 5:3. And I must have written that, I know I didn't, well, I wrote that one down wrong. Here it goes, 13, not 3. Yes. Can't read my own handwriting. Micah 5:13, not 3. Actually, I'd like to back up to verse 11. That's all right. Let's back up to verse 11. I will cut off the cities of your land, and I will throw down all your strongholds, and you shall have no soothsayers. Going to run them out of Dodge. And verse 13. Your carved images I will also cut off, and your sacred pillars from all your sacred pillars from your midst. And you shall no more worship the work of your own hand. And I will pluck up your wooden images, verse 14, from your midst, and I will destroy your cities, and I will execute vengeance in anger and fury on the nations that have not heard. So he's going to cleanse the whole world of these sacred idols, all these sacred pillars. Upon his return. Anybody else have any question or comment, or maybe another scripture along that line they'd like to offer up? Did I hear somebody? Bob?
What version are you using up there?
Actually, I'm following the New King James Version, but I don't read it exactly like it's written, because sometimes I'm aware of translational errors, and I use...
I thought you had modern English, but go ahead.
When I come across a translational issue, I read it in a more perfect manner, if you will. That's why it doesn't. So if you're using the same version as mine, that's why it may not follow exactly. Anybody else? Can we take a look at Psalm 107, please? 107 very quickly. And let's drop down to verse 17. I want to do verse 17. Fools, because of their transgression, because of their iniquities, were afflicted. Their soul abhorred all manner of food. They drew near to the gates of death, and they cried out to Yahweh in their trouble. And did I have that from down right? I don't think so. Let's see. No, I'm afraid I don't. No, I'm afraid I don't. Well, that sounds good. Let's just see what else it says. And he sent his word and healed them and delivered them from their destructions. Oh, that men would get thanks to Yahweh for his goodness and his wonderful works to the children of men. No, this is definitely the wrong. I am definitely in the wrong place. I definitely wrote that one down wrong. Well, anyway, let's just move on. Anyone else? Anyone have any thought or question? Okay, let's go back to 2 Chronicles, please. So Joshua, upon his return, he will destroy all the idols and images. We could also get a reference from Daniel 2, when he smashes into the, when the rock strikes the feet of the image in Daniel 2 and destroys it. Back to 2 Chronicles 14. And he commanded Judah to seek Yahweh of their fathers, to seek Yahweh, the Elohim of their fathers, and to observe the law and the commandments. Okay, so far so good. Why did Joshua teach about such a thing? We seem to read this a few times over, especially in the scripture we read during the Passover services. I seem to recall, if you love me, keep my commandments. If you love me, keep my commandments. We read another place again, if you love me, keep my commandments. Let's see, sin is transgression of the law. That's Bob's favorite verse, 1 John 4:3-4. Let's see, Neil, Wendy. I think he's pointing.
Also, Yahweh in Romans 8:28 says that he works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called to his purpose.
That's right. Anyone else? Let's see. They don't obey the commandments. They don't know Yahweh, and there's no light in them. John says that as well. Oh, by the way, and if you love me, keep my commandments. Let's see. I did not come to destroy the law or the prophets, but I've come rather to fulfill them. If anyone teaches against them, he'll be called least in the kingdom of Elohim. That's Matthew 5:17-19. Oh, by the way, if you love me, one more time. If you what? Thank you.
Hear and obey.
That's right. Hear and obey. If you love me, keep my commandments. So he commanded, because Joshua did come with a message of repentance. Now, if Asa is commanded you to seek Yahweh of the mighty one of their fathers and to observe the law, is he not bringing a message of repentance? What were these people doing before then? Well, they were worshiping all of the Baals and the Asherahs. They fall back into that pattern with the bad kings. The bad kings and the bad priests. And the corrupt priests. So, yeah, he brought that as well. That's in verse 5. He removed the high places and the incense of the altar from the cities of Judah, and the kingdom was quiet under him. And let's see, verse 6. He built the 45 cities in Judah, so the land had rest, and he had no war in those years because Yahweh had given him rest. Well, after the defeat of all enemies, Joshua will be given the earth some rest. They'll get a good long rest of 1,000 years, won't they? Won't it? This place will be given a much needed rest. Anybody, any thought or question? Anybody, get your hand up. I'll call on you. Okay, let's keep going here. Therefore, he said to Judah, that is Asa. Therefore, he said to Judah, let's build these cities and walls and make them around and towers and gates and bars, while the land is yet before us. Because we have sought Yahweh our Elohim, and we've sought him, he has given us rest on every side. So they built, and they prospered. Now, in the millennium, we're not going to have cities of walls and bars and gates and iron, stuff like that, but we will have peace and rest all the way around. Let's keep going. Verse 8. And Asa had an army of 300,000 from Judah who carried shields and spears, and from Benjamin who had 280,000 men who carried shields and drew bows. And these were the mighty men of valor. Okay, so does Joshua have any parallel to this? Anybody, past or present? All right, David says Revelation 5. Where exactly in Revelation 5 you got down, David?
When he comes on his white horse.
Revelation 5, okay.
Okay, that's the right one. Is it? Never mind. That's the wrong one.
20, Revelation 20.
Well, let's try Revelation 19 and 20. Revelation 19:11. Oh, we'll get to 20. We'll get to 20. Don't worry about it. We'll get to 20. Revelation 19:11. Now I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. And he that sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges, and he makes war. And his eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no one knew except for himself. He was clothed in a robe, dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of Yahweh. And the armies, there we go, verse 14. And the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. And out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, with it that he should strike the nations, and he himself will rule over them with a rod of iron. And he treads the winepress of the fierce of the wrath of Yahweh Almighty, or Yahweh El Shaddai. He has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, as King of Kings and the Master of Masters. I got a couple of, oh, that's right, when did we say we'd go to Revelation 20? Whereabouts were you looking, Lindy?
No, I'm sorry, I'm thinking Acts 10:42, I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay. We can go to Acts. Let's go to Acts. Let's go to Acts 10:42.
It's not coming in on a horse, it's not like that, it's just that,
Okay, well, let's just say, and he commanded. This is Peter speaking, and he commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that it is he who was ordained by Yahweh to be judge of the living and the dead. Okay, so he'll be a judge as well. Now let's see. Now let's try Matthew 26:53. This is during his rest in Gethsemane. And Peter just assaults the servant of the high priest, grabs his sword, cuts his ear off. Verse 52. Yahshua says to Peter, says to him, being Peter, put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Verse 53. Or do you not think that I can pray now to my Father, and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? So upon the appropriate cry for help, the Father can give him 12 legions of angels. Let's back up to 2 Kings 16, please.
Curtis.
Yes.
I've heard said that a legion is 6,000. Do you know the number of what a legion?
I don't have that information in front of me, but let's see. In any case, let's go to 2 Kings 6. We'll go to verse 16. This is a prophet. Let's back up to verse 15. Right? 2 Kings chapter 6. Let's pick it up. Let's pick it up in verse 14. Therefore he sent horses and chariots and a great army there, and came by night, and he surrounded the city. And the servant of the man of Yahweh rose early and went out, and there was the army surrounding the city with horses and chariots. And the servant arose and said to him, my master, look over there, what are we going to do? Look at that huge army out there, what are we going to do? And Elisha, so he answered, said Elisha, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who were with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Master, I pray, open up the eyes that he may see. And then Yahweh opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So when the Syrians came down to him, Elisha prayed to Yahweh and said, strike these people, I pray, with blindness. And he struck them with blindness, according to the word of Elisha. Notice he didn't order them killed or ask them to just cut them in half, but strike them with blindness. A great act of mercy would be a testament to them, wouldn't it? To this army, this physical army surrounding the city. So it is true that Yahweh can and will, according to his will, provide angels to protect us all. Anybody else? Okay, let's go back to 2 Chronicles, please. Back to 2 Chronicles. We have something very similar happening with Asa. Verse 9, because he talks about the size of Asa's army. Then Zerah the Ethiopian came against him with an army of 1,000,000 men and 300 chariots, and he came to Mareshah. So Asa went out against him. So he's going out and gets a little over 300,000 men versus 1,000,000. And they set the troops in array in the valley of the Phadah at Mareshah. And Asa cried out to Yahweh as Elohim. He said, Yahweh, it is nothing for you to help, whether with many or with those who have no power. So help us, please, O Yahweh our Elohim, for we rest on you. And in your name we go against this multitude. So he's thinking about it's not his own name. He's going in the name of the Father. He's going in Yahweh's name. Oh Yahweh, you are our Elohim. Do not let man prevail against you. He didn't say let man prevail against us. He said do not let man prevail against you. So Yahweh struck the Ethiopians before Asa and Judah, and the Ethiopians fled. So evidently this same army that came to help Elisha, the same legions of angels struck the Ethiopians. If I read this correctly, the army of Asa didn't have to do too much, if anything. Verse 12, so Yahweh struck the Ethiopians before Asa, and the Ethiopians fled. So out of this we get a picture paralleling him to Joshua of what Joshua can and will do, both past and future. During his time on earth, he could have called for the 12 legions of angels, and he's going to come back with an army like the world's never seen upon his final return. Well, the Ethiopians were overthrown; they could not recover. They were broken before Yahweh and his army. Jesus was broken before Yahweh and his army, and they carried away very much spoil. And they defeated all the cities around Gerar, for the fear of Yahweh came upon them, and they plundered all the cities, for there was exceedingly much spoil in them. They also attacked the livestock, the enclosures, and they carried off sheep and camels in abundance and returned to Jerusalem. So it seems like all Saul and his army had to do was plunder, after all these other boys fled and ran. They had nothing to do but plunder. Turn an attack and war into a big cattle drive. Chapter 15. Continuing on in 2 Kings, go straight on into chapter 15. Now the spirit of Elohim came up on Azariah, son of Obed. He's going to be ordained a prophet. And he went out to meet Asa, and he said, hear me, Asa, and all Judah, Benjamin. Yahweh is with you, and Yahweh is with you while you are with him. No, okay, so if you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. So let me ask, is this promise, is it unconditional or is it conditional?
It's conditional.
It's conditional. Yahweh is with them as long as they stay with Yahweh.
That's right.
That's all he had to do. Yes, Tom.
Jeremiah 29, you'll read the same principle where Yahweh says, and you shall seek me, and you will find me when you search for me with all of your heart. Same principle as well.
Anyone else? We read this same issue, this same condition, if you will, in both Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. For obedience, they get the blessings promised. And the greater the obedience, the greater the blessings. On the other hand, for disobedience and rebellion, they get the curses. And the greater the disobedience, the greater the curses, the greater the punishment. It's the exact same principle, which goes to show Yahweh does not change. Verse 3, chapter 15. For a long time, Israel has been without the true Elohim, and without a teaching priest, and without law. Remember, he'd come out of a series of, shall we say, corrupt priests and bad kings. But in trouble, they turned to Yahweh of Israel and sought him, and he was found by them. Let's back up to verse 3 a moment. There was a long time there had been without the true Elohim, without a teaching priest, and without law. Now we know from the scriptures that Joshua did not arise out of Levi. He was counted amongst Judah, wasn't he? So how could Joshua possibly fulfill this? Well, start with physically, he was counted from amongst the kingly line, the royal line of David, wasn't he? Chalk one up for him. And what's he going to do what is he going to do when he comes back? Will he not be amongst other things a king? He'll be the king of all kings?
Yes.
Check. But what about the priest? Melchizedek. Thank you. He will be the high priesthood of Melchizedek. And actually, this can be a trouble for a lot of folks, or too many folks, I'll phrase it this way, because they do not believe that Joshua pre-existed. That he only existed during the time recorded about his physical birth. But these folks got a problem with John, several other scriptures. When we read in Psalm 100, I believe, if I remember correctly, about this priest of Melchizedek. Abraham. She's got a problem with the words of Abraham. But Abraham went out after war to meet who? Melchizedek. Thank you. I heard the voice. I didn't hear.
King of Salem.
The king of Salem. Turned out to be this Melchizedek, to whom he paid tithes.
Abraham
And what?
did. Abraham did, right?
Abraham, you are correct. Yes, Abraham. And that was Abraham. And he paid tithes from all the spoil and plunder they'd taken. Paid tithes to Melchizedek. So he was the first priest to actually receive the tithe. And so if Yahweh had to perform a sacrifice after the fall of mankind, after the sin of Adam and Eve in the garden, who was it would have actually known how to perform this sacrifice and know how to, and be in a position to actually do it? It would have been Joshua, but would he have not been under his role as a Melchizedek, the priest? I believe so. So past, both, during the earthly ministry, he came as his teaching priest, if you will. In the future, he will be a king and a priest, and he. Because let's try Matthew 7:29, please, if we will. Matthew 7:29. Let's back up just a little bit, actually. Joshua teaching the crowds. Let's back up to verse 26. But everyone who hears these words and saying of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rains descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon the house, and it fell, and great was its fall. So it was when Joshua had ended these sayings that the people were astonished by his teaching. For he taught them as one having authority, not like the scribes, or unlike the scribes. Let's try John 7:46, please. John 7:46. Let's pick it up in verse 45. John 7, let's pick it up in verse 45. Then the officers came to the chief priests and the Pharisees, who said to them, Where's Joshua? Why didn't you bring him? Why have you not brought him? Evidently they expected them to bring him, these officers, to bring him in, handcuffed, bound and chained. Because the officers responded, no man has ever spoke like this. No man has ever spoke like this, man. And the Pharisees answered, what, are you also deceived? Have not any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed in him? Oh, well, okay. That's their proof, right? The official people, the ones they deem the official people, the smart people, the educated people, the ones from the right side of the tracks. But none of them believed in him. Well, that doesn't mean too much. Because tell me, how many of us have had a similar conversation with friends and other family that did not believe? Because so that or some other famous preacher didn't believe what we tried to tell them. I've got a few. My dad got cross with me a little bit, more than once. Let's try Luke 4:22. Luke 4:22. those who bore with him and marveled at the gracious words which poured out of his mouth. And they said, isn't this Joseph's son? But they were still, but back up just a little bit, it says that all who bore witness, they were marveled. They marveled at the gracious words which poured out of his mouth. A little line on line, precept on precept, compared to what we read in John and Matthew. We got to conclude the scribes and Pharisees never spoke like that. Because he spoke his Father's words. He spoke the words his Father had taught him. Yes, Tom.
Well, it's so evident to me that they were either willfully ignorant or they were really poor students of the scriptures. Let's be back up here, where we were in the state of speaking about them denying that he was the Messiah. They say here in this account, in verse 52 of John 7, they answered and said to him, are you also Galilee? Search and look, for out of Galilee there arises no prophet. And then every man went unto his own house. They just walked away. Oh, we're not going to hear more of this. Wait a minute. In Isaiah 9, it states clearly, nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in their vexation, when at first he lightly afflicted the lands of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterwards he had more grievous afflict her by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan and Galilee of the nations. Verse 2 of Isaiah 9. The people that walked, this is in Galilee, that walked in darkness have seen a great light. That's Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
That they dwell in the land of the shadow of death upon them that have shined. And it goes on from there so clearly. And other scholars point out this is a messianic prophecy about Messiah in the land of Galilee. And here these so-called leaders are in denial and saying there's no prophet ever rises out of Galilee. There can't be any connection here with authority. And how ignorant or purposely unscholarly these people were to say such. But the great prophet Isaiah has clearly stated just the opposite.
Anyone else? Well, the same principle could apply today, couldn't it, Tom? I mean, no one of any worth going to ever rise up out of Johnson County, Texas, right? Oh, those rednecks?
On the other side of the tracks, yeah.
Those rednecks? Yeah, I'm from Johnson County, Texas. So we're just those redneck boys down there. Okay, there. We're not going to mouth anything, right? Anyway, anyone else? Thank you, Tom, by the way. Anyone else? Anything they'd like to contribute? Thought, question, scripture. Okay, let's try going back to Chronicles, please. 2nd Chronicles. And we left off, where was it? Verse 3. When the troll turned it, they turned to Yahweh of Israel and sought him, and he was found by them. Well, those who turned to Joshua during his time, they were found by him as well. Healings, teachings, marvelous teachings.
What verse are you at?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. We're going back to 2nd Chronicles 15. Let's pick it up in verse 5. And in those times there was no peace to the one that went out, nor to the one that came in. Great turmoil was on all the inhabitants of the lands. So nation was destroyed by nation, every city, and Elohim troubled them with every adversity. So what kind of peace did Joshua bring us? He didn't exactly overthrow the Romans. Israel was vexed by Roman occupation. But did he not teach a great way to peace in, well, the passage we now call the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7? I believe he did. The nation was destroyed by nation, city by city, for Elohim troubled them with every adversity. But you, this prophet continued speaking to Asa, but you, be strong and do not let your hands be weak, for your work shall be rewarded. When Asa heard these words and the prophecy of Oded the prophet, he took courage and removed the abominable idols from all the land of Judea and Benjamin, and from the cities which he had taken in the mountains of Ephraim. And he restored the altar of Yahweh that was before the vestibule of Yahweh, that is the offering that in the temple course. He restored the altar. So in verse 8, what parallel with Joshua can we get out of this? Anybody? Yes, Larry, way in the back. I got a couple notes here, but let's just see. Go ahead, Larry.
Being that it's the Feast of Tabernacles, in which we learned about Yahshua coming millennial reign, I'm going to jump ahead. Revelation, okay? When you go into Revelations, the 17th and 18th chapters, it talks about a great woman, which is Babylon the Great. A lot of people have different versions of what they think Babylon is. They say it's a political, some of them even says, well, it's the United States. But really, what was Babylon known? It was known as the progenitor of false worship. Asa, when he started cleaning out these idols there in Judea, he cleaned out these false idols. He cut down these pillars. He did away with these things. He was cleansing the earth, so to speak, in that day. And what ended up happening is a 1,000,000-man army from Ethiopia came up against them. We will see here in the near future where Babylon, the modern, it's a harlot organization. It's the mother of false religion. It's the religious teachings around the world that are opposed to Yahweh. This will come about and will be done away with. There will be a cleansing of the earth of false religion. And so if you read, and we don't have time here to go through the 17th and 18th and 19th chapters, but if you read and study that, you can see that Babylon is not a world empire being of nations, because the kings of the earth mourn her loss. It's also not the mercantile system, because the merchants grieve at that loss of that religious.
That's right.
So it's something to look at in the near future, especially as we look at the Feast of Tabernacles.
Okay. Yes, Wendy.
You read verse 7 that says, "But you be strong and do not let your hands be feeble, for there is reward for your work." That calls to mind the scripture that tells us, work as if you, not unto men, but as if you were working for Yahweh.
Unto Yahweh.
Carefully.
That's what that brought to mind, that verse.
Yes. Very good. Anyone else? Thank you, Wendy. Let's try Matthew 21, please. We'll get there in our ongoing study of Matthew in a bit. Matthew 21, let's pick it up in verse 12. It's where Joshua was cleansing the temple. And Joshua went to the temple of Elohim and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer